Okay, this segment of the podcast, I had a gentleman send me an email, and he sent me a news clipping from a newspaper in East Texas. It's called the Polk County Enterprise, and I don't really know if me narrating these news articles is a copyright issue or not, but I'm going to go ahead and do that. And if anyone from the Polk County Enterprise has anything to say about it, they can email me, and if they have a problem with it, I'll take the video down. It's not a big deal. But this event was reported to happen in San Jacinto County. Here's the story. The story is written by Andrea Whitney, but the title of the story is Bigfoot Out and About in San Jacinto Amid COVID. COVID-19 has covered the front page of the newspapers across the country. It has, however, not stolen the thunder of one of San Jacinto County's most popular residents, Bigfoot. Yes, Bigfoot. Recently, I was contacted by a good friend who also happens to be a detective nearby. Normally, our conversations start out with basic information and facts revolving around a crime or crash, but not this time. I picked up my cell phone to answer his call, which came at approximately 2:30 a.m., and I answered, still halfway asleep, to hear my detective friend ask me what I was doing. Fishing. I was fishing, I quipped back with more sarcasm than I intended. What do you think I was doing? Is something wrong with you? Are you okay? Wait, did something happen to my kids, my mother, sister, or husband, or dog? I quickly did a brief checklist in my head to ensure myself that all was right in my world. Mom is at home, my sister is somewhere with her new boyfriend, and my children are asleep in my bed with me, which means my husband is somewhere in the house. After being booted out of our bed by the children, who although at 18 and 19 years of age insist on piling up in my bed because it's more comfortable. I glanced down at the floor, and there was my dog, and beside him was my husband, wrapped in my little pony blanket on the floor. Side note, I need to take a photo of him and the macho blanket he's covered with in case anyone should ever doubt his manliness. Okay, mental checklist done, and I caught my breath. No one had been hurt or died or required any type of medical attention, so what now? Why are you calling me this late? I asked. The story he relayed to me could best be described as, well, never mind. There's no description for something like this. Law enforcement officers have a special place in my heart, and I like the mind of an investigator. I like how they look at the facts. I've always looked to the police officers and the FBI agents and investigators when I had things I could not make sense of. I have a deep respect for them most of the time. My hero officer began to tell me a story that if it was relayed to me by any other individual, I would not have believed. I will spare you the mundane details and I'll get right to it. Apparently, two men that are both high in authority within law enforcement circles decided to take a drive down some country back roads. It was a quiet night, and the two men just wanted to enjoy a brief reprieve from the bad guys before beginning their reports. Andrea, listen to me. You know me, right? He said. Yes, I replied. You know I always tell you the truth, right? Uh-huh, I replied. Note to self, this is not going to be good. When a police officer begins a conversation with you like the one above, it is never good. The Cliff Notes version of what happened is as follows. Decorated veteran officers looking for a peaceful ride in the country since there are no donut shops nearby. Decorated veteran officers grab a cup of coffee and pile into one of the unmarked SUVs and they hit the road. Officers hang a left turn off the main road and take a drive down a dirt road nearby. And as they make their way down the dirt road, traveling deeper into the thicket, the driver can see the form of what appears to be something crossing the road, and it was something big. My thoughts immediately went to whoever was crossing the road, the officer who was driving said. You don't have the luxury of thinking that the form was anything good once you've been in this business long enough. Immediately, my thoughts went to drugs or kidnapping, a robbery, or worse. There was no reason that anyone should be out on that road at that time of night, and alone at that. With their radars and keen sense of danger now high on alert, the two men looked at each other, and without saying a word, they both began filing every detail of what they saw, heard, and felt into a mental lockbox. My partner and I have worked together for over 10 years, one officer told the San Jacinto News-Times. We know each other's actions and even expressions, and when I looked at my partner, I knew our evening was about to get crazy. And crazy is putting it mildly. As they approached the area, when they initially saw whoever or whatever it was crossing the road, the hairs on the back of their necks stood up. I call it FBC, or full body chills. The partner, who was in the passenger side, said, "It's a sixth sense that we all have. It is a strange feeling of being on the edge and calculating every step and every move. It is scary, and if any member of law enforcement tells you that they don't get scared, then they do not need to be in this line of work, because fear keeps you alive." It had been only approximately 15 to 20 seconds prior when the men had witnessed what they described as a really tall man dart across the road into the wood line. As they got closer, there was no sign of anything or anyone. As both men began to take a collective deep breath of relief, their air was once again stolen when they stepped out of the SUV. I feel like I should give you a rundown of my education and training before I tell you what happened next. I have seen a lot in my time in law enforcement, as has my partner, he said. We have always been able to connect the dots and timeline of a crime or case based on evidence, and that's what we rely on. But in this case, I don't even know where or how to begin. The investigator sat across from me in a conference room at the station, and until this moment, they both had been at ease, maybe a little apprehensive, but nothing out of the ordinary. It was when they reached this point in their tale that everything changed. Both officers began to show unmistakable signs of anxiety and unrest. One began tapping his leg up and down rapidly. His face turned that shade of red that a person only gets when he or she is facing a frightening or an embarrassing situation. The second officer, who up until a moment ago was very relaxed, began clicking his pen up and down and eventually began to pace around the conference room. Just like police officers are taught to read body language, journalists like myself are trained in the same manner. It becomes second nature to rely on a person's actions rather than their words. And what I was witnessing in front of me was textbook fear and anxiety. Up until this moment, I had been relaxed, but as the officers began to tell me the rest of this story, I too began to fall victim to pen clicking and leg shaking. The seasoned officers began to tell me how, as they were getting back into the cab of their SUV, they both heard what can only be described as a primal scream. It gave me chills, and for me to get chills, that's saying something, one officer said. The two men explained that they began taking steps backward toward the pickup and heard the scream even louder. Being a career law enforcement officer, I knew no one was going to believe me, so I grabbed my phone and I hit record. And I was able to capture whatever the heck this thing was on audio as it screamed, he said. The officer allowed me to listen to whoever or whatever was making the sound, and as long as I have been in this business, there isn't a lot I haven't heard that I could not pinpoint the source. Well, make that journalist 0, something scarier than fiction 1. As we continued talking and trying to find a rational explanation of what could make that kind of sound, the officers continued their story. We had made it back to the vehicle, and by this time we had one goal: get the heck out of there. We both climbed into our seats and were preparing to get out of Dodge when we heard that scream again. And this time it was louder, and it was closer, and it sounded as if it would shatter glass. I began to back up and turn around. The road we were traveling was narrow, and it took some skill for me to maneuver without ending up in a ditch. As I backed up and got us going in the right direction, I saw it. We saw it, the detective said. Both men agreed as they were trying to turn around and leave. The headlights of their vehicle shined on what can only be called a Sasquatch, or better known as Bigfoot. Yes, I know it sounds crazy, and if you print my name in this article, I'll have no choice but to call you a liar, the detective laughed uneasily. The partner, who had not said much up until this point, made eye contact with me and described the creature as being approximately 7 feet tall, with long arms and broad shoulders and strong. Doesn't sound too bad, that is until he proceeded with his description of the creature. He was hairy. He was covered from head to toe with dark grayish colored hair. His features looked like they had been etched out with a chisel. He had a sharp jawline, and he was just so big. I've seen criminals, and I've seen gorillas, and I've seen everything in between, but I cannot say that I ever encountered anything like this before, explained the second officer. The two men both recall that one of the most fearful traits of the creature were that he had yellow eyes. His eyes just poured into you, one said. That's the only way I know to describe it. It took only seconds for the creature to disappear into the thick wilderness. He was there, and then he was gone, just like that. You would think something as large as this thing would not be able to move quickly, but he literally soared. I watched him take no more than 2 or 3 steps, and he was gone. After hearing the officer's tale and listening to it again, I began to dig into a little history of San Jacinto County and its elusive primate. Over the past 70 years, I have come across numerous articles of residents who have come face to face with this creature. Although each collection differs slightly in detail, I am certain of one thing. San Jacinto County is home to some of the best people around, and it is also home to Bigfoot. Doubt as you may, and I can completely understand the inclination to do so, it is my belief that there is something beyond the pines. I followed the facts and I interviewed and re-interviewed witnesses, trying to come to a logical conclusion, and after hours of study and research, the only thing I can confirm with certainty is that San Jacinto County is home to something quite unusual. And then the editor's note reads, if you have experienced something out of the ordinary within the county, I would love to hear from you. Email editor at I'll put this into the description so you guys, if someone lives in San Jacinto County, you can email the editor of this publication, and if you've sent it to me, send it to them too, because apparently Andrea Whitney is onto something here. She really is interested in these strange stories. So the email address for the editor at the Polk County Enterprise will be in the description. Welcome to the Dixiecryptid podcast. Also, on the podcast network, we call this the What If It's True podcast. If you haven't found us on the podcast network, whatever podcast app you use, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon, Audible, anybody that carries podcasts, do a search for What If It's True podcast, and we're right at the top of the list. You can follow along there, download all the episodes. I've been away for a while. I got real busy at work, and I just didn't feel like I could do work justice and do this podcast too. But I'm caught up now for a few days, and I'm back podcasting, and I'm so happy about it. All we do here is tell stories. If you like good stories, if you like to sit back and drive, sit around your kitchen table and eat supper and listen to stories, any way you like your story, we'll deliver it to you. If you like that kind of stuff, you found your people. Odd stories from real people just like you. Before we get going with the podcast, I want to let you know my buddies over at the Yeti Bar Soap Company have their Memorial Day sale going on right now. That means everything is 10% off. And when you check out, if you use the code DC10, you get an additional 10% off. Go over and check them out at YetiBars.net. They've got a new product now. It's a new stick of deodorant. I think it's called the Yeti Sour. Something about gummy bears. Not sure what that is. I'm going to have to check it out. YetiBars.net, Yeti Bars on Facebook. You got to give them a try. You won't be sorry. All right, let's roll on with this podcast. Thank you for joining me. All right, here we go.
And I ain't looking back to the hell where I come from.
Here's an email I received from a woman a while back. This is 2 secondhand stories that she heard that friends of hers told her, and I thought this was fascinating. So here we go. She writes, "Dear Cam, I'm a fan of your channel and I have 2 stories for you. One is an alien abduction and the other is a Dogman sighting. Neither story is mine, but I know the people that witnessed these incidents. Story number 1, the alien abduction. This is Randy's story. Rest in peace, Randy. I'm representing you, dear friend. In 1998, I returned to my dusty little hometown in New Mexico for my 20-year high school reunion. And being in a little town, I ran into a dear friend of mine, Randy. It was great to see him, and he looked awesome. He was a short, blonde-headed, blue-eyed athlete who was always eager for a good joke and any activity that involved people. After 20 years, he hadn't changed a bit. The only difference in Randy was his eyes. He had a wide-awake look in his eyes that was almost too enthusiastic. Was he excited to see me? Maybe. Or was there something else? We decided to go for a drive together because in high school, that's what everyone did. We all got together and drove through the hills looking at different scenic landscapes and doing stupid things like rolling Dad's four-wheeler or burying our axle in a sandy wash. So there we were, like old times in 1978, parked on a bluff, overlooking the town and smoking pot. I had outgrown the pot thing, but I did partake in it just for the novelty and to prove to myself I hadn't become an old prude. I was buzzed and out of things to small talk about, and I made the comment, "Randy, are you nervous about seeing everyone at the reunion? I don't know why, but I'm nervous about it." "The reunion? That's nothing," he smiled and he laughed. "I'm completely relaxed around those people. There's nothing scary about those people at all." And then his face changed and he stared down at his arm. "You see that scar on my arm?" he asked. I looked at his forearm and the scar on it was the size of a dime. It was round and irregular, like a small bullet wound. "I dug a shard out of my own arm with a pocket knife," he triumphantly said, pointing at the scar. "A shard? How did it get there?" I asked. "One day, Em and I were ditching school. We were just riding around out in the bluffs and smoking, and a spacecraft picked us up." "What the hell? An actual UFO picked you guys up?" I asked. My face was frozen in total shock at what I was hearing. "Yep," he said. "They picked us up in their spacecraft and they laid us out on a table. I was physically examined, and then they put these glass-like shards in my body. One was here in my arm and the other one," he turned his back to me and pointed at the base of his skull on the back of his neck. "They put it in the base of my skull," he said. "What did the shard look like?" I asked. "The one I dug out of my arm looked like glass. It was about the size of a grain of rice, but it was flat and kind of curved," he said, drawing an imaginary shard with his fingers. "I really had to dig, too. It was embedded in my muscle close to the bone, but I was determined to dig it out, and I did. That thing bothered me." Looking out and recalling a memory, he continued, "When I went into the Army, the doctors took the one out of my skull after they had to put me through a series of hypnosis sessions." "Well, that's good, but how did they find out about it? Did you tell them?" I asked. "No, I went in for a physical and the doctor asked me about the scar on my arm, and I told him what happened. And then I showed him the back of my neck where I thought the other one was, and he asked if I still had the shard, and I said, yeah, it's in a box in my locker. He told me to bring it in for him to look at it, and so I did." Apparently it was quite a find. They kept having me come back in for more conferencing and other physical exams. I want to see it. This is really important evidence, I said. You actually have evidence of an alien contact? Yeah, I guess I did, but not anymore. They took the shard that I dug out of my arm and they never gave it back to me. Instead, they started the whole process of these hypnosis sessions, and it really freaked me out. They found exactly where the other shard was and they removed it, but I didn't get to keep that one either. I never even saw it. The whole ordeal messed up my head and I couldn't stop crying after that. I kept crying and crying. It was weird. I didn't want him to start crying as I was in his car and we were both high on pot, so I changed the focus. How's Mike after all this? I asked. He's cool. Let's go see him, Randy said, firing up the engine. So we went into town and back into the old neighborhood where both Randy and Mike grew up. Arriving at Mike's and parked in the car in Mike's driveway, we both walked up to the door and we knocked. Mike answered, looking the same as he did in high school, and he invited us in and we continued more pot smoking. These guys had become the heads and I had become the square. And after some small talk, we looked at vacation photos and we never talked about the abduction again. But a curious note is, Mike is still a bachelor and he had become quiet and reclusive. I never got married or had kids, he said. I don't know why, it just never happened. It's not unusual in this day and age, I said, but I thought it's because you got the life scared out of you in high school. That night we went to the reunion and we had a great time, disco dancing and catching up with life stories. Everyone was amazing and for the most part, everybody seemed happy. A few years later, Randy was found dead in an apartment in Bisbee, Arizona. It was hush-hush as to how he died. Was it suicide? I think so. I think he was implanted with tracking devices, and his suffering of fear was unrelenting. I believe that's what happened 100%. God bless Randy in the heavens with the peace and love of our eternal grand creator. So be it, the woman writes at the end of her first story. And I thought that was very interesting. Let's move on to story number 2, the Dogman Sighting. And she writes, this is my nephew's wife's parents' story that takes place in the same little dusty town in New Mexico. Here's the town layout, she writes. The town is situated down in a valley where 2 rivers meet. Looking up, the valley is lined with jagged sandstone bluffs, and the only things that grow up there are desert plants, sagebrush, and gnarly cedars. Then down in the valley is a lush green farmland with towering old cottonwoods and salt cedars and rabbit brush. The rivers are mountain runoff, and they're teeming with freshwater trout and bass. And it's not unusual to see an eagle perched on a limb just chillin'. My dad lived down by the river and he loved hearing the honking geese fly by. He also had lots of deer that came into his yard for a tasty treat, and he used to mimic them with his front teeth and say, "The deer have nipped off all those rosebuds from my rose bushes." Then he'd click his teeth together to show just how they did it. One night, my nephew and his wife came over for dinner, and we were sitting around the table afterward having a beer. My nephew suddenly looked puzzled. "Hey, a weird thing happened to Peggy's parents the other night," he said. "They were on the other side of the river delivering newspapers to people who live in all those little houses back there. You know how everyone has their houses tucked away in the back of their acreage? Well, Peggy's mom was driving along a dirt road while her dad tossed the papers, and there was barely enough light to see. And then her dad sniffed something in the air and looked over at her mom with a stank eye. He said, 'You smell that?' 'Yeah, that's really rank. Something definitely died around here,' she said. And then on the passenger side of the car, they saw a creature with a dog's head running on 2 legs like a man. It was keeping pace with them alongside of their car. Well, what did they do?" I asked. "Well, they didn't do anything. They didn't have any time to do anything. The creature was so fast, and it ran around the front of the car, and then it ran into these people's front yard. Well, did anyone see it? I asked. No, it went to the side of the house really fast and it hopped on their brick wall like nothing. And Peggy's dad said the wall was high up and that thing didn't need to jump. Without any effort, it hopped up and then it just turned back and it stared at them. They froze and suddenly it just turned and hopped down in the people's backyard. And that was it. That was the last they saw of it. That's a true story. And then she goes on to write, after listening to your podcast, I'm able to include other details and have put two and two together. I recall that after my dad passed away, black helicopters started cruising the valley. They chased away all the geese and the eagles, and then the county started clearing all the underbrush away from the trees, so no more deer were there either. And then they diverted the river so that it became a trickle of water, and the wildlife has systematically gone away. Now that I've listened to your podcast, I wonder if that wasn't a way to flush out the dogmen. My hunch says yes. And then she goes on to write, I hope people hear these stories because credibility is important. Validation is important. But even more important is protection. And I'm not really sure what that means, but I thought these were two really good secondhand stories. These are the first story's from a high school mate, and the other is from some people in her family who, why would the Dogman thing, why would somebody just make that up? It's not, these are just normal people having dinner. There's no way to know if they have a history of lying, but let's assume they don't. And then all of a sudden this woman and man say, well, we just saw this dog-like creature running around on two legs, run right around the front of our car into someone's yard, up on the fence, and then boop, on the other side, it's gone. I don't know why anybody would tell that story if there wasn't a little bit of truth to it. And this dogman information, myth, or these stories are not really super prevalent, not like Bigfoot. Bigfoot is known, and alien abductions and all of that other stuff is far more notable, and information on it is more widespread than anything like a dogman. The dogman, the werewolf thing it's just not a huge popular topic, but people see them and then we get stories about them. So, to the writer, she didn't give me permission to use her name, but I thought this was wonderful. So thank you for sending this to me. I appreciate it. On a summer weekend in 2009, three 20-something men hiked into the Colorado Rockies for a week of backpacking. I was good friends with one of those men. All three were in good shape, so a week at those elevations was easy. The hike was uneventful and fun for the first 2 days. They woke from their second night at camp at an elevation of 9,500 feet. The small fire was warm and the coffee was good. An unusual, thick fog surrounded the area. They had been in the mountains all their lives and not seen a fog this thick. Visibility was only 10 feet. The plan was to wait out the fog and hope it dissipated so they could continue their hike. Until the fog lifted, they agreed that none of them would venture beyond the small radius of the tents. One of the men needed to relieve himself after coffee. He told his mates he was walking just beyond the tent and for them to keep talking so he could find his way back, just in case. Minutes passed and the men called for their friend. They walked in the direction he had walked and their friend had vanished. Within an hour, visibility had improved, but the third man was gone. They searched for him as best as two men could in that terrain. And through the morning, they climbed to an elevation they thought they might achieve a cellular signal. They called 911 for help, and they continued their search. Combing the area for hours, they found nothing, so they backtracked past the last 2 nights' campsites and finally back to their vehicles late the next day. When they met up with the search team, they were discouraged to hear their friend was still missing. The next day, 50 miles away as the crow flies, and probably 150 if he had walked it, the man was found by state police walking a dirt road away from the area. He was confused and disoriented. He was unsure of his location and had no idea how he had got there. Otherwise, he was in good health. No exposure to the elements. It's just that he was a blank on what had happened. Last month, I asked my friend, who was his hiking partner on that trip, if he had talked to the lost man since this episode. He responded with a hearty yes. They were best friends and they talked all the time. I asked the obvious question, had he figured out what had happened that week? He had not, and to this day doesn't understand or remember how he made it to that mountain dirt road so far away. I asked my friend what he thought. He only shrugged and told me that no human could walk that distance in the mountains during the time frame that he was missing. He went on to say they all agreed that it would remain a mystery. There is an explanation, though, but you would have to believe in alien abductions for it to work. Here's an email from Crystal from Arizona. Growing up in the East Valley in Arizona, I spent a lot of my time in the desert. My dad taught us a lot about the dangers of hiking in the desert while searching for geodes and camping in the Sonoran Desert. You learn to keep your head on a swivel. It gets hot in the valley during the summer, and the hottest I experienced was 125 degrees Fahrenheit. To beat the heat, this past summer, we went on a family camping trip in the Sitgreaves, Sitgreaves National Forest in northeast Arizona. Y'all, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce some of these places, but it's just who I am. I've never seen that word in my life, so I'm just taking a shot at it. I had never camped on the 260 by the lakes before. There were 3 adults, my mom, my brother, and me, along with 2 teens. We got a late start, so we didn't get to the rim until late. We drove past all the paid campsites and we turned down the next Forest Service road. 2 miles later, we came upon a dispersed camping site with fire rings. We drove until the road was blocked off and we found our spot, and the closest campers were a mile away. Within 30 minutes to set up our camp before dark, we sent the kids off to find firewood while we set up camp. And I noticed all the trees had orange tags on them, which meant that we couldn't set up tents beyond those. As soon as my 11-year-old nephew got out of the car, he went into King Kong routine, hitting his fists against his chest and banging branches against trees. I asked him not to do that because we didn't know what was in the woods and we didn't want to attract something, and I promised we'd survey in the morning and see what was around. As soon as we had arrived, my brother got sick, so he spent most of the time in his tent. The rest of us settled in and we ate our campfire meal. When the kids went to bed, leaving just Mom and me to soak in the quiet and stare into the campfire, we weren't as far from society as we would have liked. Mom's phone kept getting notifications. Sometime between 8:30 and 9, I started to hear whooping. I sat there listening and trying to identify what animal could make this noise. It would stay in the same spot for a while and then it would move. This went on for hours. It was still whooping when we went to sleep. The next morning, the boys were anxious to hike and adventure in the woods. My brother was still sick, so I took them to hike the small canyon behind our tents. Right away, I noticed all the tree trunks on the ground. A lot of them were pointing north by northwest. There were a lot of tall ferns, and I looked for an animal trail to follow, but there were none, so we ventured on through the ferns. On the other side, I noticed old tracks from a small bear and told the boys that we needed to move. We cut through and went to the opposite from where we'd started, and the whole area was the size of a football field. The boys discovered a cave on this side and they claimed the territory to explore. And afterwards we went back to camp and we enjoyed the day. My nephew continued to knock branches against trees, and when I asked him why he was doing that, he said, "Something's knocking in the woods and I'm just knocking back." Well, I told him not to wander off too far. Later that day, we went on another hike where the road had been barricaded off to drivers. We walked down the hill and came upon a beautiful valley. I noticed something off in the woods. It was a big, round, long piece of metal. We have flash floods here, so I figured it was something used to direct the flow of water elsewhere. However, it was a strange place for it to be, and we took in the scenery and snapped a few pictures, and we went back toward camp. We saw 2 cow elks not far from camp, so I decided I'd go hiking on my own to see how close I could get to them. I'm small and light-footed, and as a kid, I made it a game to sneak up on people and surprise them. So I wanted to sneak up and get a picture of these elk. On I crept, being as quiet as I could, and I got within 150 feet of them when they heard something. They took off to my right, and then they looked back at me. I had my phone out and my camera ready, so I turned to my right and I got a quick picture. Meanwhile, the elk stopped and went back to eating. A few minutes later, they looked up again and they ran off. I assumed I had made too much noise for them. I had claimed an area as my spot, and I headed in that direction. There was a tree there that I had come across while out exploring. It was unusual, but not naturally so. It had been manipulated to look the way it did. I had originally thought it was a Native American live directory sign. However, the Native Americans hadn't been in this area since the cavalry chased them out. This tree was young, and the arch in it would take time to create. A snare trap wouldn't do that. And besides, it would have had to have been placed there for quite a while to achieve the shape. There was also a nice boulder there to lie on and admire the canopy and the view of the little canyon. However, I began to get the feeling that I was being watched, so I headed back to camp. I took a lot of pictures as I went, while the lighting was right. Several of those pictures I took behind me because I really felt like something was there. I never felt threatened, I just knew something was there, and I wanted it to know that I knew it was there. We started the fire early, and we ate before the sun went down, and then we all sat around the fire for a while before the boys and my brother all went to bed. It was just Mom and me again, and I put a pile of wood on the fire and went to change into my night clothes while she took pictures of the blazing fire. While I was digging through my bag, I heard the clanking of a truck pulling a trailer as it hit potholes on another dirt road leading to the lake. The Mom yelled and asked if I'd heard that. She spooks real easily. I only take about 30% of her spooks seriously, so I yelled back at her and told her that it was just a truck pulling a trailer. I continued to pull my things out of my bag until I heard boulders shifting in the canyon behind my tent. It was coming from near the caves where the boys had played all day. I dressed and I sat there listening for a minute as the boulders continued to shift. I went out and I told my mother about the boulders I'd heard while I'd added more wood to the fire. And meanwhile, she pulled out her flashlight and she began looking into the woods. Something was moving. It had glowing eyes. That was enough for us. We woke my brother to get him to shoot off around in that direction. And at first, he thought we were overreacting, and I reminded him that I've spent a night out in the desert being stalked by a mountain lion. I wouldn't wake him up if it was nothing, I told him. Well, he grumbled, but he grabbed his gun and he came out, and that's when he saw the eyes too. They were peeking over the edge of a rock like it had ducked down. He fired the gun at the eyes and they disappeared, and in my experience, a bear or a lion would have run off. He went back to bed, and we stayed up. I added more wood to the fire and sat down in my chair to stare into it and to listen to the sounds of the night. However, Mom's nerves were shot, and she was on edge. She began to clean up what little mess we had made, and then out of nowhere she shined her light into the woods once again. And I assured her that we'd scared off whatever was out there, but she said, "No, Crystal, something is still there." I hadn't heard anything but complete silence up until this point. I finally got her to settle, and then I saw the eyes again. They were big, round, glowing eyes staring at us, and I couldn't believe how far apart the eyes were set or how round they were. From a distance, it appeared to be at eye level with us. I was amazed at how it had circled the camp to get to the other side without making a sound. I wrote it off as a mountain lion at the worst, but their eyes were almond-shaped and they were set farther apart than a lion. Then I thought, maybe it's a bear, but again the eye shape wasn't right, and they would have been closer together. My brother must have been still awake, and he came out with the gun again, and he held the light on this creature, and he shot right at it. That's when it stood up. It was so tall, it was at least 7 or 8 feet tall. It didn't even flinch or try to run away. It just stood there staring at us intensely. At this point, we were all spooked, so we went into one tent together. The boys didn't have any trouble falling asleep, but Mom and I were wide awake now. We laid there in the silence for what felt like forever, but there were no noises outside, and all we could hear was the wind in the trees and blowing against the tent. The last time I checked my watch, it was 2:30 a.m. before I finally fell asleep. At 5:27 a.m., we were all awakened by the sound of a dog barking. It wasn't an ordinary bark, though. It was like a cross between a coyote cackle and a dog bark. It was the strangest bark I'd ever heard, and as soon as we all got up and started moving around, the barking stopped. Later that morning, I went out to do my morning business, and that's where I finally saw tracks. They weren't bear tracks and they weren't lion tracks, and it was not a little critter or a hoofed animal. These tracks were wide, bare feet that measured 4 hands in length and 2 fists in width. It had circled my bathroom spot. I saw where the tracks had come up the hillside from the little canyon. There was a boulder there that I would sit on and have a smoke when I wanted to get away from the family. This totally amazed me, and there were more tracks around, but they were smaller. I went back to camp and told everyone what I found. They all wanted to see it too, and my brother was as amazed as I was. He'd been in this rim many times, but he'd never seen anything like this. To say the least, we were a little freaked out, so we decided to cut our Monday to Thursday camping trip short on Tuesday morning. We heard knocking the whole time we packed up, and my nephew continued to knock back. When I went back to my spot to change into cleaner clothes, I took whatever this thing was, a small bouquet of flowers and grass. Some change fell out of my pocket as I was changing, so I left a dime or two and some pennies, and I propped up a piece of wood facing north by northwest. I left camp and went to the lake to fish like we'd planned, and afterwards we went home. I've never experienced anything like this. It was quiet the whole time with very few critters around. Usually I see a lot of squirrels out there. I will camp there again, but not with the children. Well, Crystal, that's a pretty cool story. I mean, I think at some point you guys saw this thing. You saw it stand up. It was 7 or 8 feet tall. I don't know. Sometimes when I read these stories and like in the middle, they have a visual sighting of a Bigfoot. And then they go on to talk about more tracks and things like that. I don't know. That's all I would talk about is the visual sighting of this thing. That would blow me away to actually see something 8 feet tall stand up with glowing eyes. I mean, that's amazing. I wonder how you feel about your brother shooting right at it the last time. Do you think he hit it, or do you think he missed it and this creature just could care less? Just wondering what that's all about. I don't think I would shoot at one of these things unless it was coming right at me in an aggressive posture. You know, that's just me. I'm not gonna shoot at anything unless it's trying to kill me. But this is a very interesting story, and it all happened in Arizona in the let's see, what was the name of the area? Sitgreaves National Forest in northeast Arizona. We've got a few encounter stories from Arizona. All right, guys, let's go to another one. All right, and last, this is something different than anything I've ever done. And I get these type of emails quite a bit. And I'm not going to give you the writer's name because I think maybe she wrote this just for me. I don't really know for sure. And I had it flagged to put on What If It's True, but since we're bringing all that over here to Dixie, I'm just going to do it here. Now, before I start, I'm going to say I don't necessarily believe or disbelieve any of this. I'm just reading you the email. There is some of it that she talks about that I don't think is true, but she thinks it's true, and she claims to have pretty credible sources on this, so I'm just going to read it. So before anybody starts beating me up, I didn't write this, but I'm going to share it with you because I like these freaky kind of theories. They're just really cool. And so here, we're gonna just go ahead and read it. She writes, I discovered your channel or your channels just a couple of weeks ago, and I love the way you tell the stories that seem unbelievable, but I imagine most are actually true. I've been on a sort of quest for the truth for the past 6 years, and the more I learn, the more unbelievable things seem to get. As I watch your videos, I notice a recurring naive theme in your comments. Sometimes not knowing the full truth or not having the answers to our questions is better or easier for us to deal with. I've been debating on whether or not to send this email, and I'm giving you just a small tidbit of the answers. And for this reason, I'm going to give you the key and let you decide if you want to unlock the door. I know you believe in God, but consider for a moment that there are other gods capable of creating life in whatever form they choose, with whatever purpose they choose, be it malevolent or benign, and in different locations throughout the numerous galaxies that exist. Yes, that means that our loving, nurturing God created us, but she also created similar life forms on other planets long before we were created. With that said, now consider another god or gods may have created the malevolent life forms on other planets, namely reptilians and greys as they are commonly referred to. To date, I'm aware of 27 different species or life forms currently in existence. Good and evil exist in many forms. While on the subject of God, let me point out that there are a total of 777 books in the original Bible. We have been given 60 plus or minus books, and they were manipulated long ago by humans under the orders of Constantine the Great. This is the Bible we currently use. His personal goal was to devise a manual of sorts that would control the population through fear tactics. Will it shock you to know that there is no such thing as hell, that we, our souls, never die? Reincarnation is real, and our judgment day is when we review what we learned or accomplished in our lifetime and determine, with God's help, if we should relive that particular life experience or move on to the next level. Did Constantine work alone, or did he have help? Fortunately, the original text is handed down by God were saved and protected in the Vatican. Those were recently recovered by our military and are now in the proper hands to be translated and made available to the masses in the coming years. The contents will reveal a vast amount of amazing truth that has been hidden from us for a very long time. And speaking of the Vatican, what better way to control and manipulate the population than through a massive worldwide religion and control sets of beliefs? Have you ever read any accounts of World War II and how Hitler had some very amazing futuristic flying machines and technologies? Would you be surprised if I told you that Hitler was approached by the reptilian race and others, and he signed a treaty with them? These reptilians lied to Hitler and told him that they were forced to leave their dying planet and they were in desperate need of human DNA to blend with their own DNA in order to stimulate their population to survive. Hitler agreed to allow the reptilians to abduct a certain number of humans to obtain the DNA they needed in exchange for advanced technologies. The outrageous stories you hear about Antarctica being an alien underground civilization? Now, will it blow your mind to know that our own President Eisenhower signed the Greada Treaty in 1954 that gave the aliens the same liberties? Why do you think our technology has skyrocketed in the past 50 to 70 years? It wasn't because we were so smart and suddenly had all these great ideas. Consider Area 51 to be a massive cooperation between humans and aliens for this purpose. As you might expect, those evil aliens lied and had alternative goals. I won't go into detail about what their goals were, but suffice it to say that they began taking more and more humans, doing much more than just taking their DNA and performing experiments that would make your skin crawl. Have you ever read the stories about the macabre experiments that were done in Germany upon the Jews? They were not just stories, and they have become more advanced and more sinister with each passing year. You must also keep in mind that this is not just an alien undertaking. There are evil humans, too, that have been working with them to further their own repulsive, greedy lusts. Okay, I've either aroused your curiosity, or you are sitting there shaking your head and convinced that I'm a lunatic. You've said many times in your videos that you are not a researcher, and I understand that. I wasn't either until 7 years ago. And as I said earlier, I'm giving you the key, and it's up to you to either open the door or just put the key in your pocket and walk away. Our world is changing rapidly, and the evil that has been manipulating us for thousands of years is being eradicated, and the entire world population will be gradually introduced to the truth over the coming 2 to 10 years. I'm not going to give you a long list of places to check out and verify what I've said to be true. I will suggest that you go take a look at the videos by Dr. Michael Salla, S-A-L-L-A, on YouTube. It's a good place to start if you want more answers. And as bizarre as some of this might seem, I can assure you that they are very real and filled with truth. The choice is yours to start learning now or to wait and allow it to be fed to you gradually. And with all of this being said, I also have to say that I love your stories from a knowing perspective, and I enjoy listening to all the accounts of Bigfoots, aliens, dogmen, and all the rest. Regardless of what people know, or think they know, or don't know at all, they are very entertaining, and I appreciate the time and energy you devote to them. Much love, and she signs off. Well, regarding that last paragraph, it's my pleasure to do this, and I don't go that deep into this stuff. I have my own set of spiritual beliefs, and to me, the Bible is very simple. I don't know I don't know where she gets it. There are 777 books in the original Bible, and the Catholic Church has apparently kept those hidden for all these years. Constantine ushered in Christendom. I know that history, and it's all very interesting history to me. But I just don't know how all this ties in together, and I don't know that I'm that interested in the details. I'm interested in the periphery, the stories that go around it. And like this letter, I would love to talk to this woman and find out what makes her tick. Where does her interest in this come from? Maybe I should have been a psychologist, and maybe I should have chosen that route when I was younger, but because I've always been interested in people, what develops their interest? What makes them be a plumber? Or why did they become a teacher or a plumber or a welder or a engineer? Or why do you dig so deep into these crazy theories? This really is a crazy theory because it's so not mainstream. It's not anything about, it does not follow any lines of anything we've ever been taught growing up, and it's so out. I got a dog scratching at the door. I never get mad at my dogs, but that infuriates me because I probably just let her out Now she wants right back in. Anyway, I thought this letter was so interesting. It's a perspective I have never really seen or heard. Dr. Michael Salla on YouTube. Michael Salla, S-A-L-L-A. If you guys want to look him up and dig in and find some of those videos, that would be up to you. So, that'll do it for this video. I thought I'd do a few different things, and I'm really enjoying doing these outer space, Dogman, alien stuff, and I hope you guys are too, but I'm going to keep doing it. This isn't just a strictly Bigfoot channel anymore. We're doing all kind of crazy stories, all kind of, when I say crazy, I mean that, I don't mean that in the pejorative. I mean that kind of flippantly, odd stories. That's what I'm interested in. I'm going to do on this podcast what I'm interested in. I'm interested in all of it. So there's that. You guys have a great week. Sorry I've been gone so long. More podcasts this week. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.
I'm gonna roll down the river now.
Down that river.
Gonna head to the place where I know